Before millions, Barron Trump spits venom at Jasmine Crockett, tearing at her past, her race, her very name. But in one breath, she flips the humiliation back on him, and turns his pride to ashes. Her vow shakes Washington, crashes across the world, and leaves America gasping. So, what devastating words did Jasmine unleash that brought Barron to his knees? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The congressional hearing room in 2025 was a battlefield under blinding television lights. Every chair, every polished desk was lit up for millions of viewers watching live. Jasmine Crockett entered with steady steps, a thick folder clutched tight, her face carved from steel. Across from her sat Barron Trump, towering and smug, draped in the arrogance of inheritance, smiling like a prince waiting to crush a challenger. When his turn came, Barron didn't speak of laws or democracy. He turned, eyes locked on Jasmine, voice sharp enough to cut glass. You are nothing but the daughter of a filthy ghetto, raised in the stench of gunfire and failure. Without pity votes for your skin color, you'd still be a third-rate lawyer lost in dusty county courts. Don't delude yourself into thinking you belong here with us. Those born to lead, not leech off the system. The words detonated in the chamber. Silence swallowed the air. Reporters froze mid-keystroke and cameras zoomed tight on Jasmine's face. Her eyes burned unblinking, her body rigid, the storm gathering. Barron leaned back, crossing his legs, lips curled in contempt. He thought he had ended her, but in truth he had just lit the fuse of his own destruction. Barron leaned forward, his voice dripping with disdain, each word thrown like a dart meant to wound. You're not sitting here because of talent, he declared, letting the words hang, daring anyone to challenge him. You're sitting here because of a diversity quota. This entire system handed you that chair as a prop to parade America as fair. But the truth is, people like you never deserve it. This seat is theater, and you, Congresswoman Crockett, are nothing but the showpiece. His tone was laced with contempt, a sneer curling across his lips, as if he had torn her down once and for all. The room erupted in a low wave of noise, the sound of murmurs breaking through the tense silence. Reporters exchanged glances, fingers hovering over keyboards, knowing history was unfolding, but unsure how to capture it in words. A few members of Congress shook their heads, visibly disturbed by the cruelty of Barron's words. Others sat stiff, eyes downcast, terrified of the cameras that swept across the chamber. No one moved to defend Jasmine. The weight of his insult hung over the chamber like smoke choking the air. And yet Jasmine Crockett did not flinch. Slowly, deliberately, she rose from her chair. Her posture was calm, her face unreadable, but her eyes burned with intensity. She did not rush to respond, did not shout, did not waste breath on anger. Instead, she placed her hand lightly on the thick folder before her and lifted her chin. When she spoke, her voice carried like thunder rolling across a storm. Let me take you back, Jasmine said, her words deliberate, slicing through the silence. She paused, her eyes, never leaving Barron's. Let me take you back to Selma, Alabama. The year was 1965. The chamber stilled, every camera tilting toward her. On that day, hundreds of black men and women, young and old, marched across the Eden Pettus Bridge. They weren't carrying guns. They weren't calling for war. They carried one demand: the right to vote. Her hand lifted slowly as though she were painting the scene for all to see. And what did they receive for daring to ask? They were met with batons, with whips, with boots crushing their backs. Tear gas filled their lungs. Horses trampled them into the pavement. Fathers were beaten bloody in front of their children. Mothers had their skulls split open for daring to raise their voices. That bridge became a river of blood. Its stones soaked with sacrifice. They called it Bloody Sunday. And it was not history in a book. It was the price paid for me to stand here now. The air tightened, the weight of her words pressing down on the chamber. Some members of Congress bowed their heads. Reporters stopped typing and simply listened. Jasmine's voice grew stronger, rising like a tide. Congressman John Lewis was there, she said, her tone unwavering. He walked that bridge. He was beaten until his skull fractured for daring to demand the right to vote. And when the blood dried, when the bruises ached and the wounds had not healed, he said these words: some people gave their blood for the right to participate in the democratic process. We believe that democracy was worth it. The quote fell heavy, undeniable, a summons from the past echoing into the present. Jasmine stepped closer to the microphone, her eyes locked on Barron. Her voice sharpened, her cadence deliberate. I am not sitting here because of quotas. I am not sitting here because of pity. I am sitting here because of blood spilled on American soil. Because of sweat dripping down faces that never gave up, because of bones broken on a bridge that refused to let freedom die. I am the product of a vow carved into the flesh of the fallen and etched into the conscience of this nation. And I vow here and now that the light they carry, the light of justice, will never go out. Not for you, not for your insults, not for your arrogance. Her words hit like hammer strikes, each syllable deliberate, each sentence a blow. The chamber went silent, every person inside frozen in the storm she had unleashed. For several long seconds, there was nothing. No cough, no shuffle, no whisper. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate, their red lights glowing like watchful eyes recording every breath. Then from the back a sound broke the silence, a pair of hands clapping, tentative but steady. Then another joined and another. Applause spread like fire, scattered but undeniable. The chamber stirred, filled with the sound of acknowledgement, of recognition, of history being honored in the present. Barron shifted in his chair. The smirk that had carried him moments ago cracked and collapsed into a grimace. He bit his lip, jaw tense, trying to mask the frustration boiling beneath the surface. His sneer twisted into something uglier. No longer the arrogance of triumph, but the bitterness of a man who realized he had just been outmatched. The camera zoomed in, mercilessly, capturing every flicker of discomfort, every crack in his facade. Jasmine Crockett had not raised her voice. She had not lashed out. She had summoned history itself, and in doing so, she had turned Barron's insult into his own undoing. The applause still lingered in the chamber when the chairman raised his gavel and struck the block sharply. The crack echoed like thunder. Order! He demanded, his voice stern. The clapping died down, replaced again by the thick, suffocating silence that had hung over the room all afternoon. Cameras panned, reporters steadied their hands. As the spotlight shifting back toward the two figures locked in a battle of words. The storm Jasmine had summoned was far from over. Barron leaned back slowly in his chair, stretching as if he had already regained the upper hand, his lips curved into a faint, dismissive smile. With a casual shrug, he released words meant to slice through Jasmine's triumph. Touching, he said, voice heavy with sarcasm. But the past doesn't feed the present. Singing the praises of Martin Luther King or John Lewis won't write a single law. In today's America, power is still in the hands of men like me. His words rang out cold, arrogant, deliberate, as though he wanted the cameras to capture every syllable. A ripple passed through the room, not applause this time, but unease. Some lawmakers shifted in their seats, their eyes darting to Jasmine, waiting for her to strike back. Others looked away, unwilling to be caught on camera reacting to such venom. Reporters exchanged glances, their faces tightening with disbelief. The insult was not as loud as before, but it was sharper, subtler, like poison poured into a glass of water, harder to detect, deadlier in effect. Barron smirked, enjoying the discomfort spreading through the chamber. Convinced he had wrestled back control, but Jasmine did not answer. She did not move. She stood rooted to her spot, her folder still under her hand, her gaze fixed like steel. The silence she held was heavier than his words. Her lips remained pressed shut, her face calm, her eyes burning with a fire that no camera could miss. The silence grew thick, pressing down on the chamber. Barron's confidence began to falter as he realized her refusal to speak was not weakness. It was power. The cameras zoomed in tight, their lenses hungry for every twitch, every glance. They found Jasmine's face cold, unwavering, unblinking. It was the look of someone who had been insulted 100 times before, but refused to break, the look of someone who could wait out the storm until the storm destroyed itself. In living rooms across the country, millions of viewers leaned forward, holding their breath. The silence was louder than any speech, heavier than any argument. Barron shifted in his chair. He crossed his legs again, then uncrossed them. He tapped his fingers lightly on the table, a nervous rhythm disguised as boredom. The smirk on his lips twitched. No longer easy, no longer smooth. He tried to lean back, but the chair suddenly felt smaller. He had spoken, yet she had not. And that lack of response, that unbroken silence rattled him more than any counterargument ever could. The audience at home knew it, too. Social media feeds lit up instantly. She said nothing, but said everything. Clips of Jasmine's silent stare spread across screens, shared and replayed the quiet power more devastating than a roar. The nation watched transfixed as Barron Trump, so loud, so entitled, squirmed in the shadow of a woman who didn't even need to speak. Inside the chamber, the tension climbed like a string pulled tighter and tighter, threatening to snap. The silence wasn't a pause. It was a weapon. Every second it lasted, it stripped Barron's words of their power, reducing them to noise, to desperation. Jasmine stood tall, still, eyes locked forward, the embodiment of control under fire. The silence was no retreat. It was pressure building, suffocating, and aimed entirely at him. For the lawmakers present, for the journalists, scribbling in their notebooks, for the millions watching at home, the scene played like a thriller, every heartbeat amplified, every second stretched thin. The silence had become its own performance. And everyone knew it would end, not with calm, but with an explosion. The chamber braced itself because this was no lull. This was the tightening of the coil before it snapped, the intake of breath. Before the scream, the heavy pause before the strike. This was not the end of the battle. This was the moment before the next blow. Then Jasmine moved. She rose in one clean motion and pointed toward the dais. "Mr. Chairman, please switch on the main screen." She said, her voice so steady it seemed to pin the room in place. The scoreboard's eyes display blinked from black to blue, then froze on a waiting thumbnail. Jasmine did not look at the cameras or at the crowd. She kept her gaze fixed on Barron, as if drawing a wire from the screen to his chair. "Roll it," she said, and the chamber inhaled as one. The video opened with a crisp timestamp and caption, October 14, 2023. Ocean Vista Estate, Palm Beach, Florida. Music pounded through a chandeliered ballroom where tuxedos and sequins churned like a glittering tide. Barron, 17 and swaying, clutched a red cup while a circle of friends lifted their phones, hungry for spectacle. He laughed, pitched his voice high, and mimicked the cadence of a black classmate, shoulders bouncing with performative swagger. Then he leaned into the lens and said, clear enough to cut glass. "We have to keep the schools clean. We cannot let black people ruin them." The room on video erupted with cheers as if cruelty were a party trick. The hearing room convulsed. Gas shattered the hush. Whispers surged into a rolling roar that slapped the marble and came back louder. Reporters snapped to their feet, lenses firing in hard staccato, the sound like hail against glass. Lawmakers traded looks that mixed shock and fury. Some tore off headsets as if they had misheard. Others covered their mouths, unwilling to be caught on camera mid-curse. The clip stuttered to an end on Barron's drunken smirk, eyes glazed, chin lifted, a prince posing for a crown he believed could never fall. The lights in the chamber felt brighter, crueler, exposing every tremor, every pore. Color climbed Barron's neck like a flare punching through smoke. He leaned into his mic and forced a shrug that landed stiff and unnatural. "It was just a youthful joke who hasn't made mistakes," he said, chopping the air with his palm as if he could cleave outrage into manageable pieces. He tried to hold the room with boredom, but the effort showed. His gaze bounced from face to face and then died on the tabletop. A tendril of panic slipped through his composure, and even the cameras caught it. The sentence he'd thrown at the nation lay there, flimsy as tissue in a storm. Jasmine stepped forward, closing the distance with the certainty of a verdict. Her voice dropped to steel, stripped of everything but truth. Mistake is when you fall and get back up. But this is belief. This is your very blood and flesh. And today you have just proven it still lives in every word you just spoke. She let the word stand without ornament, a column of iron and heated air. No one coughed. No one shuffled. Even the camera seemed to lean closer, their red light steady, unblinking. For a beat that felt like a cliff edge, the nation hovered over the moment. Photographers framed the split screen, the frozen party smirk on the left, the shrinking man at council table on the right. Staffers whispered about censure and subpoenas. Somewhere a pen snapped in a clenched fist and skittered across tile. The air thickened heavy as wet canvas, tugging at shoulders and lungs, as if the room itself understood the gravity. Outside sirens wailed and faded like the city was echoing the shock inside. Inside the second climax didn't explode with fire. It crashed in with pressure and weight, driving Barron to the brink with nowhere left to stand. The chamber was still trembling from Jasmine's brutal strike when the chairman slammed his gavel down. The crack snapped across the room like a gunshot. He barked though his voice barely contained the tension. The murmurs sank back into silence. The walls seeming to lean closer, waiting to hear the next move. The storm hadn't passed. It was only circling tighter. Barron's chest heaved as he dragged in quick breaths, his composure hanging by a thread. His face was pale, his hands fidgeted near the microphone, and sweat glistened under the harsh television lights. Forcing himself upright, he tried to muster the smug confidence that had carried him at the start. His words, however, betrayed the tremor in his voice. "Nobody's perfect," he said, his tone, rough, brittle. "Not me, not you. Everyone carries stains from their past. Do you think you're any different?" His attempt at defiance rang hollow, more plea than power, a desperate swing at dignity. The room froze again. Some lawmakers exchanged wary glances, unsure if they should nod or look away. Reporters leaned forward, pencils, scratching furiously across pads, eyes locked on the two figures at the heart of the storm. The cameras zoomed in, one framing Barron's quivering jaw, the other locked on Jasmine's unflinching face. The contrast was brutal. He looked cornered. She looked carved from stone. The tension in the air was unbearable. The kind of pressure that made even breathing feel dangerous. Jasmine did not answer. She did not shift. She did not even blink. Her silence was not surrender. It was domination. Her eyes locked on Barron's sharp, fierce, glowing like steel drawn from a forge. They pierced straight through him, stripping away every mask, every excuse, every shield he tried to throw up. That stare was not passive. It was active, predatory, relentless. It told him and everyone watching that she didn't need words to cut him apart. Her silence was sharper than his accusations. Barron faltered under that gaze. He tried to hold her stare, but his eyes darted down, then sideways, then back again. Each flicker caught by the cameras. His throat bobbed with a hard swallow. He forced a smirk, but it twisted weakly, exposing the cracks in his armor. His line, "Nobody's perfect," sounded like an excuse whispered by a child caught red-handed. Jasmine's silence swallowed it whole, smothering his attempt to claw background. The audience at home felt it too. Millions watching on television leaned forward in their chairs, waiting, gripping armrests, sensing the coil tightening. The silence on screen wasn't empty. It was filled with danger, with tension, with the certainty that something devastating was about to happen. Social media exploded with live reactions. "She said nothing but destroyed him. Her eyes are killing him more than words ever could." Clips of her unbroken stare spread instantly, becoming memes and headlines within minutes. Inside the chamber, the lawmakers held themselves rigid, as though afraid a single cough would break the spell. Even the chairman gripped his gavel without moving, watching, waiting powerless to intervene. The air was so taut it seemed to buzz like the moment before glass shatters. Barron tried to break it with nervous gestures, adjusting his tie, shifting in his chair, but each movement only revealed how rattled he was. The silence did not let him escape. It pinned him harder to his seat. Jasmine's eyes never wavered. They shone with defiance, with conviction, with the unspoken promise that she was not done. She let the silence stretch. Let it grow unbearable because she knew what Barron and everyone else in that chamber knew. This was not the end. It was the pause before the blow that would finish him. Every heartbeat thudded louder. Every breath scraped heavier. The silence was not calming. It was suffocating, pressing down like the weight of a storm about to break. The cameras captured it all. The sweat on Barron's forehead. The tremble of his hand against the desk. The unyielding fire in Jasmine's eyes. The nation was glued to its screens, caught between dread and anticipation, sensing history trembling on the brink. The silence became a performance of its own, a weapon wielded with perfect precision. Jasmine's refusal to speak screamed louder than any outburst, louder than any rebuttal she could have delivered. And then, as the chamber sat straining under the weight of it, the realization struck like lightning. This was only an intermission. The storm had not ended. It was gathering force, condensing, sharpening into a single strike. The silence was not retreat. It was a warning. It was the inhale before the scream, the stillness before the thunder. Everyone in that room and everyone watching across America knew the truth. The pause was temporary. A final blow was coming. The silence stretched to the breaking point, every breath in the chamber sharp and ragged. Then Jasmine reached into the stack of folders before her. Her hand paused for a moment, steady but heavy with memory before pulling out a small envelope worn thin. The edges frayed, corners bent from years of being carried. She held it up, not rushing, letting the camera zoom, letting the entire nation see the fragility of paper that carried the weight of history. "This," she said softly, her voice trembling, "but clear, is more than an envelope. This is a piece of my father's life." The room leaned in as though pulled by gravity. My father marched. My father stood among those who were beaten for demanding the vote. And inside this envelope is what he kept with him every day. Folded and worn, a photocopy of a letter written by Justice Thud Marshall. He called it his treasure. He called it his vow. She drew the flap open with slow care, her fingers shaking just enough for the cameras to capture. The paper slid out, thin, yellowed at the edges. Jasmine unfolded it carefully as if afraid the pass might tear in her hands. For a moment she looked down at it, her lips pressed tight, her throat working to form words that carried not just ink, but bloodlines. When she began to read, her voice cracked once, then steadied. "The right to vote is a permanent oath. No one, not power, not money, can take it away." The words rang out like scripture, plain and undeniable. They echoed off marble and steel, straight into the homes of millions. The chamber fell silent, truly silent. No cough, no whisper, no shuffle of papers dared intrude. The lights from the cameras poured across her face, catching every shadow, every shimmer in her eyes. It was as though the world had paused, holding still for one moment to etch her into memory. In that frozen instant, Jasmine wasn't just a congresswoman. She was a vessel of history, standing in the light of every man and woman who had fallen on the bridge at Selma. The weight of their sacrifice poured through her voice into the chamber, into the nation. She lifted her head, squaring her shoulders, her eyes sharp, her voice now iron wrapped in fire. "Today, under these lights, I read that oath again. And I vow," she said, her tone cutting clean as a blade. "I vow that I will never allow it to be defiled by arrogance or by hate." The words were not shouted. They were driven, deliberate, final. Each syllable hammered into the air, into the record, into the hearts of every person watching. It was a promise not to a party, not to a chamber, but to history itself. The effect was immediate and absolute. Barron Trump's body seemed to fold in on itself. He lowered his head, his gaze fixed on the desk, unable to meet her eyes or the cameras. The smirk he had worn earlier, the armor of mockery and arrogance, was gone. In its place, sat a man exposed, cornered, stripped of defense. He pressed his lips together, jaw tight, but no words came. His silence now was not power. It was surrender. The room felt the shift. Lawmakers stiffened, knowing they had just witnessed a turning point. Reporters scribbled frantically, aware the headline was no longer about insults or scandals, but about vows in history. The chamber was electric, charged with the undeniable sense that something irreversible had just happened. The air itself seemed carved a line drawn between what had been said and what could never be taken back. The cameras caught everything. The fragile envelope on the table, the paper trembling under Jasmine's hand, the cold lights on her determined face, and Barron's bowed head shadowed defeated. The nation saw the duel end, not with a scream, but with a vow. And in that moment, everyone knew Jasmine's words had been the blade. The oath was the strike. Barron had no shield left. This was the finishing blow, a sword of principle driven straight through the armor of arrogance. The oath still shivered in the lights when Barron lunged for a last defense. He leaned into the mic, squaring his shoulders with brittle bravado, and tried to sound amused. "You're just acting to win over the audience," he said, the smile on his lips wobbling. The line was built to recast conviction as theater, to turn a vow into a trick of lighting. Instead, it fell flat, a cardboard shield in a storm of stone. The chamber tightened in silence as cameras slid closer, waiting for the next decisive, inevitable blow for the reckoning. Jasmine did not waste a word. She raised 2 fingers toward the control booth. "Second screen," she said, and the wall display bloomed from black to blue. A title card stamped across the corner. May 18, 2024. Silver Meridian Hotel Miami Future of Tech Benefit Room 410, 11:42 p.m. Participants along the footer Barron Trump Ethan Ward classmate Cole Bradley Donor's son Alina Rodas AI startup advisor 2 unidentified staffers by the bar. The phone video panned over half-empty glasses and name badges then locked on Barron grinning as he announced artificial intelligence must maintain white advantage. That is how to keep America strong. The audio clipped with laughter. A hand clapped his shoulder. Someone off camera urged say it louder as ice rattled in a bucket. The hearing room detonated. Booze spilled from the public gallery raw and immediate. A congresswoman clutched her temples. Across the aisle, a senator dropped his pen and stared at the carpet. Photographers hammered their shutters in bursts, the sound stitching the air into metal while red record lights burned. Counsel whispered in tight knots as if a memo could sand down the edges of what the country had just heard. Barron reached for the microphone, then stopped. His hand hovered and fell. He tried again, but his fingers trembled like they were gripping a live wire buzzing with exposure. A flush bled up his neck and drained from his cheeks in the same breath, leaving him blotched and pale. Words gathered and scattered behind his eyes, dying before they formed useless as smoke. Jasmine stepped forward into the cone of white, her face calm, her voice honed to steel a blade without flourish. Truth does not choose a skin color. It only chooses justice. The sentence struck like a hammer on an anvil. A clear ring that swallowed every corner of the hall. For one suspended beat, the room held utterly still. Every breath caught in the same fist, every eye fixed. Then the wave hit cheers, cresting over boos. A roar overwhelming the chairman's gavel and his calls for order. Several members shot to their feet, palms slamming the wood in a rhythm of relief. Cameras split the feed. Jasmine steady beneath the glare, chin lifted. Barron drained and bowed, eyes down, mouth slack, shoulders caving. The nation watched the scale tip in real-time, evidence, weighing one pen, arrogance falling from the other. He stood because sitting looked like surrender, but standing looked worse, the pose of a man exposed. The chair scraped, his knee buckled, and he caught himself on the desk with a clatter. A pen rolled tapping into the aisle. He let it go. He kept his gaze glued to the papers he could no longer read and edged sideways, hunting an exit that would not feel like flight. The gallery's faces followed him, a corridor of judgment he could not outwalk. He passed the threshold and disappeared into the darker hall beyond, swallowed by whispered disbelief. The cameras returned to the D's as the applause thinned to breath and then to a charged hush. Reporters typed as if trying to capture lightning before it left the room, keys clacking like rain on tin. A few members remained standing, hands flat on their desks, unwilling to sit on a moment like this. The record now held a second screen, a sentence, and a vow. Not rumor, not rhetoric, but proof set in pixels and in voice. This was the hearing's endgame. The arrogant ground to dust, the defender of justice raised in the light, the judgment sealed for all to see. In the record of this day, nothing else was needed. The second screen, the line, and the vow told the whole story. When the chamber finally exhaled, the country inhaled. By sunrise, front pages stacked across diners and doorsteps carried the same blistering headline, "Under the Lights Barron Trump Brought Down." Cable charons echoed it in relentless loops, stitching the phrase into the morning like thread through cloth. Push alerts pinged phones on subways and in elevators, telling the story before coffee even hit lips. Editorial boards argued over verbs, but not over the moment. They agreed it was decisive. The image they chose again and again was Jasmine in the white glare, the vow in her eyes. Networks built their day around the clip, replaying it between traffic and weather as if it were breaking news every minute. Studio sets turned into tribunals' anchors, rereading the lines as if handling smoking evidence. Producers cut the footage tight, the envelope, the words, the silence, the collapse, each beat landing like a drum. Commentators competed to package it in perfect summary, but the raw video kept beating every crafted sentence. Podcasts pushed emergency episodes. Newsletters sent special editions with highlighted transcripts. Even late-night shows scrapped jokes and ran the vow uncut. America split down familiar scenes, but this fracture felt freshly cut. Progressive organizers called it a turning point and printed posters overnight with Jasmine's face framed by the caption "Under the Lights." In city plazas and college quads, crowds cheered at portable screens, then chanted the words they had just heard. Conservative influencers blasted out "Witch Hunt" in capital letters, flooding comment threads with the old badge of grievance. Talk radio host tagged callers by Team Witch Hunt or Wake Up Call, and the lines lit like pinball machines. In living rooms, couples whispered arguments so their kids wouldn't wake and ask which side they were on. School districts move faster than they usually move on anything that isn't snow. Superintendent emailed principals before sunrise. Advisory period will include a short civic segment. Play the congressional clip. Homeroom teachers pulled blinds, rolled carts with speakers, and tested volume twice. In classrooms, it smelled of dry erase and cafeteria steam. The video washed over rows of hoodies and backpacks. The vow landed in the seconds after the bell, cutting through the rustle of papers and the drone of fluorescent lights. A guidance counselor stood in the doorway and watched a room sit perfectly still. In one 9th grade civics class, the teacher paused on Jasmine's face and asked for 5 quiet breaths before anyone spoke. A kid in the back said his grandmother had marched once, but he had never believed her stories could be that violent. Another student, usually silent, raised her hand and asked what an oath means if nobody keeps it. A boy with a track jacket said, "It's not history if it keeps happening." And the teacher wrote the sentence on the board. They rewound the clip and counted the seconds of silence, then underlined them as if they were text. When the bell rang, no one moved until the final frame faded. Districts near Selma held assemblies that felt like church and history class braided together. A principal dimmed the lights, let the video run, then clicked to a slide of the Eden Pettus Bridge, still spanning, still scarred. A retired social studies teacher stood at a lectern and read a paragraph about Bloody Sunday. Then set the page down because his voice shook. In the quiet that followed, a girl in the front row wiped her eyes and whispered, "My great-grandpa was there." The gym breathed as one while the vow replayed through a portable speaker that crackled. When the lights rose, students looked smaller and older at once. At senior centers and union halls, the television glow lit faces that remembered the sting of tear gas with muscle memory. Veterans of the long fight leaned forward in wheelchairs, hands needing armrests as the bridge flashed on screen. One man tapped a cane 3 times when the envelope appeared, an old signal in a new war. A woman closed her eyes and mouthed the words permanent oaths like a prayer she had been saying for 60 years. Another said she could still smell the horses on that day, the leather and sweat and fear. When the vow landed, they nodded in unison as if answering roll call. In church basement, community organizers taped butcher paper to cinder block walls and wrote 3 phrases, vow light witness. Teens printed QR codes linking to the clip and taped them to bus stops. Pastors threaded the moment into sermons without changing a single scripture line, and choirs carried the word oath up to rafters. In barber shops, the headline sat beside clippers and aftershave, and every fade came with a debate. Synagogues and mosques held study circles about courage in public, playing the vow and letting the room sit quiet before anyone offered commentary. Everywhere the phrase witch hunt floated like smoke, visible and choking, but the vow cut through it like a clean wind. The story spread because it was simple and sharp, a spark traveling a wire already strung. People wrote it on whiteboards and index cards and sticky notes, pinning it above desks like a compass. Parents texted it to kids with 3 words added, "This is yours." Coaches read it before practice. Librarians printed it and set it beside biographies of John Lewis. Bus drivers played the clip on low volume and let silence do the rest. The message walked itself from screen to screen and door to door. Justice needs only one person to stand. The light will spread everywhere. Newsrooms kept pushing updates, but the headline never changed, only echoed. Under the lights, Barron Trump brought down appeared in small-town weeklies and glossy national magazines, sharing fonts like a shared heartbeat. Editorial cartoons drew the envelope as a lantern held high above a crowd that kept growing. Morning shows invited teachers, elders, and teenagers to speak, and none of them argued. They only described the same cold chill, the same bright heat. The moment had crushed one man's performance and lifted one woman's vow, and that contrast was its power. The country held both images in mind like a before and after. By evening, the clip had become a ritual played at kitchen tables between steaming plates and the clink of forks. A father paused it and said, "Listen to the silence after the sentence." And his son did, eyes narrow trying to hear what wasn't sound. A grandmother in Selma opened her window and heard neighborhood TVs all strike the same note at the same time. A high school marching band practiced in a parking lot and broke formation when a teacher held up a phone and said, "Just watch." On the sidewalk, strangers swapped earbuds for 1 minute and then nodded to each other without names. The light moved in straight lines and then in circles, then in waves. By night, the headline glowed from storefronts and screens, and the country understood the first truth of the aftermath. It wasn't policy or polls. It was the electricity of witness, the charge of one voice speaking where millions could hear. The split remained, flags planted on both hills. Witch hunt on one, vow on the other, but the ground between them brightened. Teachers had lesson plans. Elders had names to remember. Children had language for courage. The first message settled over the map like a soft, persistent rain. Justice needs only one person to stand. The light will spread everywhere. The day after the hearing, television became a battlefield. Fox News lit up its evening slot with a headline splashed in red Crockett. The actress on screen, a host, leaned forward, eyes blazing as he replayed the moment Jasmine raised the envelope. "What you saw yesterday," he told viewers, "wasn't courage. It was theater. She's not a congresswoman standing for justice. She's a performer staging a drama." Guests nodded, each piling on. One analyst said Jasmine had rehearsed every pause like a Broadway script. Another claimed the envelope had been a prop planted weeks in advance. They laughed, rolled their eyes, framed her as a manipulator. The message was blunt. Jasmine Crockett wasn't a truth teller. She was a female dramatist, a trickster, dazzling naive crowds. Across the dial, CNN lit its own fire. Their headline glowed in blue beacon of justice. A panel of commentators replayed the same clip, but the tone was reverent, almost hushed. One anchor leaned forward, voice low. "What you're seeing here is not theater. It's history." Another shook her head in awe. Under those lights, she carried the weight of Selma, the courage of John Lewis, the vow of Thud Marshall. She didn't just read words, she resurrected them. They rolled slow, motion footage of Jasmine lifting her chin as the lights fell, her voice echoing in perfect clarity. Music swelled under the package. CNN declared she stood where history demanded she stand. And she did not falter. The country didn't just have a split screen of opinion. It had two worlds clashing on live TV. Social media poured gasoline on the flames. Twitter timelines flooded with side-by-side edits. Barron smirking, then Barron's face collapsing, cut against Jasmine holding the envelope like a torch. The hashtag Sure Under the Lights trended worldwide within hours. Memes spread with captions like "History doesn't whisper, it roars." Facebook feeds filled with grandparents sharing links to the clip, writing long posts about marches they remembered, tears they never forgot. TikTok spun the moment into loops. Students reenacted the silence before Jasmine spoke. Others synced her vow to beats of hip-hop tracks, turning history into rhythm. A 17-second snippet of Barron muttering, "Nobody's perfect," got stitched thousands of times, always followed by Jasmine's cold, unblinking stare. The humiliation became digital currency, traded and replayed by millions. Civil rights organizations seized the momentum with urgency. Then MAC issued a statement within hours. Yesterday, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett reminded America that democracy is an oath written in sacrifice. "We demand Congress honor that oath with immediate voting rights reform." Black Voters Matter held a press conference on courthouse steps in Atlanta, banners fluttering with the words "permanent oath." Their directors shouted into microphones, "If one voice under the lights can expose injustice, then one bill under these chambers can fix it." Students at Howard University held vigils with candles reading aloud the Marshall letter Jasmine had quoted. Marches formed in Chicago, Detroit and Memphis. Not spontaneous chaos, but disciplined, organized rallies demanding structural change. Jasmine's vow became a rallying cry plastered across placards and chanted through megaphones. But resistance coiled fast. Conservative lawmakers huddled inside rooms, their whispers spilling into microphones. A senior congressman stepped before cameras and declared, "We cannot take this at face value. The video evidence shown must be investigated." Was it doctored? Was it taken out of context? "We owe the American people transparency." His words spread across Fox and right-wing blogs, sparking demands for committee subpoenas, forensic checks. The call was simple. If the video could be undermined, Barron could be salvaged. A senator from Texas slammed his hand on a lectern and said, "Witch hunts belong in Salem, not Washington." Donors and lobbyists echoed the cry, pumping money into media buys that blasted Jasmine as a manipulator, staging trials of public opinion. Yet, the facts held firm. Forensic analysts contracted by multiple outlets confirmed metadata, timestamps, and voices on the tapes. The hotel, where the AIA remark was recorded, released logs matching the date and time. Witnesses surfaced, reluctant but undeniable, admitting they'd been in the room when Barron made the statement. Each confirmation chipped away at the denial, leaving his defenders clutching at smoke. A New York Times headline cut like a blade. Authenticity confirmed, Barron's words cannot be erased. Even conservative-leaning outlets carried grudging updates. The more they questioned the tapes, the more solid the proof became. The nation roiled in the contradiction. In bars, men argued over the volume of televisions, voices rising until bartenders threatened to cut sound. In living rooms, families fractured, parents siding with Jasmine, children pairing witch hunt from TikTok influencers. Churches divided, sermons split between praising her courage and condemning her as a fraud. Yet, beneath the noise, something deeper moved. Conversations shifted from Barron's downfall to the promise in Jasmine's vow. People whispered not just about politics, but about purpose. "Justice doesn't pick a color," she had said. The line seeped into everyday talk, repeated at water coolers, posted on coffee shop chalkboards, scribbled on sticky notes left on car dashboards. In Oakland, a muralist painted Jasmine's silhouette holding the envelope, her vow curling across brick in bright letters. In Birmingham, a group of high school seniors staged a reenactment of the hearing for their history project, ending with the line, "The light will never go out." In rural Kansas, a retired farmer told a local reporter, "I'm not much for politics, but that woman made me feel like I was back in church hearing truth, not noise." The phrase witch hunt flared on one side, but on the other, the seeds of awareness dug deep. Communities that rarely spoke of civil rights suddenly found themselves revisiting Selma, revisiting Marshall, revisiting the meaning of an oath. The more society split, the more undeniable the ripple became. Commentators compared the hearing to the Watergate testimony, others to the Army McCarthy hearings. Moments when a single exchange shifted the country's compass. Fox still mocked her as the actress, but even their clips kept replaying her vow, spreading it unintentionally. CNN replayed hourly anchors, calling it the line of the decade. Social media never let the loop rest. Every scroll brought the same fire, every click rekindled the same vow. People weren't just watching a congresswoman spar with a Trump. They were watching history re-enter the bloodstream of the present. And so the narrative locked into place. Jasmine Crockett stood as a symbol, whether praised or mocked, and Barron Trump shrank into a cautionary tale. The country was divided. Yes, but even division could not smother the new spark of awareness. Because beyond the headlines and hashtags, one truth burned a steady. The past had not died. It lived in the letter, in the vow, in the silence that followed her words. The message pulsed across screens and streets. The past is never dead. It never sleeps. It waits in letters folded into wallets, in bridges stained red, in vows whispered and shouted. It lives again each time someone dares to speak under the lights. And when it lives, the nation must listen. Across the ocean, the story did not stop at America's shore. International front pages ran a single phrase above the fold. Selma of the 21st century. Morning shows in London, Lagos, and Lisbon rolled the clip of Jasmine under the lights, pausing on the envelope like it was a relic. Foreign correspondents stood in the cold outside the Capitol and told viewers they were seeing a democracy argue with its ghosts. The line about an oath read across marble caught by cameras played with subtitles in a dozen languages. The world recognized the shape of the fight even if it didn't know the names. In Johannesburg, the evening bulletin opened with drone shots of the Eden Pettus Bridge, then cut to the hearing room, then back again. The anchor looked into the lens and said, "Selma of the 21st century," as if calling a name from a roll sheet. An older panelist, hair, silvered by years of struggle, nodded slowly and said, "We know this feeling. History knocks until someone opens the door." The segment ended with a still of Jasmine's face, light flaring at the edge like sunrise. Viewers did not argue with the headline. They felt the weight of it. In São Paulo, a leading daily ran a wraparound cover with Jasmine's silhouette rising from black into cobalt blue. The caption read simply, "Selma of the 21st century." No extra verbs, no qualifiers, only the stamp of recognition. Writers compared the hearing silence to the heavy hush in stadiums before a decisive penalty kick. Comment page filled with short notes, memories of marches, names of lost relatives, messages to children about dignity. Even the business section carried the phrase under a graph as if markets too could hear an oath. In Paris, a Sunday magazine framed Jasmine against a column backdrop and printed Selma de Baniam Shaquille in white letters across the image. The feature story moved from Alabama to Washington in measured steps, holding the reader's hand through time. Photographs showed the envelope on the table like a small, stubborn star. An editor's note at the end said, "The past speaks in the present when someone dares to repeat the vow." Newsstands sold out before noon and reprint orders rolled before sunset. In Cape Town, radio callers argued in 3 languages about the meaning of a vow made under bright lights. One voice said, "We all carry copies of letters in our pockets, even if they are only in our heads." Another answered, "It is not the paper. It is the courage to read it." The host read 2 headlines, "Selma of the 21st Century" and "A Light That Refused to Dim," then let the line hang. Traffic thinned as drivers turned up the volume, listening for the moment the music under the clip went quiet. The silence made its own sound. In the townships of Swado and Alexandra, color found concrete as dawn broke. Young artists hung stencils of Jasmine's profile on brick and corrugated metal. The envelope pressed to her chest like a shield. Beneath the image, they sprayed a single-word vow. Above it, they wrote "Selma of the 21st Century" in neat block letters, translating the idea into the common tongue of paint and promise. Mothers on their way to work stopped and took photos, sending them to group chats with prayer hands and heart emojis. The wall seemed to breathe. Across Rio, activists gathered under overpasses and in community centers, holding up laser-printed posters still warm from the copier. The design was simple. Jasmine in high contrast, the envelope bright, the headline, "Selma of the 21st Century" below. A drummer laid down a beat and voices lifted over traffic. Oath children traced the shape of the envelope with crayons on butcher paper, then taped their drawings to a cinder block wall. Someone whispered, "We needed a picture to carry this feeling." And the pictures multiplied. In a FLLA classroom perched on a hillside, a teacher propped a tablet on a stack of dog-eared textbooks and hit play. The students leaned in. The room fell still. The vow came through a cheap speaker with surprising clarity. After the clip, the teacher wrote on the board, "Selma of the 21st Century, and under it, what does a vow ask of you?" Maybe a boy in the second row said to stand when it's dark. A girl beside him said to stand where everyone can see. On the Paris Metro posters for concerts and clothing sales shared space with a new print Jasmine silhouette against a field of blue, the envelope lit like a lantern. Below the word "Selma Dwayne Yinim Sequel" ran in clean type. A headline turned into a promise. Writers took pictures. Mirrors snapped in moving glass. The image repeating down the car. A woman in a nurse's uniform touched the paper lightly then let go. A young man slipped one poster from its frame and rolled it under his coat like a secret. At the Place de Republique, organizers unfurled a banner almost as wide as the square. They kept the message "Spare Jasmine's outline," the envelope, and the words "Selma Dubaini" and "Meek Kimkel." Speakers did not pile on adjectives. They told short stories, moments at checkpoints, jobs lost, names mispronounced. Someone read the line about the oath into a windy microphone and the crowd responded with an unfamiliar hush. Rain started and stopped and no one moved. Editors tried to capture the shape of a day that had turned into a mirror. A South African weekly called the moment "a chord that rang across seas." A Brazilian columnist wrote, "A vow is only a sentence until someone gives it breath." A French editorial signed off, "Selma is not a place. It is a test." In each case, the headline did the work. Selma of the 21st Century. Readers knew the reference, even if they'd never read a single page of its history. Back in Washington, a small public park became a construction site in the soft light of morning. City crews unstrapped a pale granite steel leaf from a flatbed truck and guided it upright with straps and careful hands. The block was tall and plain, its face smooth, its edges clean, the simplicity chosen on purpose. A temporary fence kept passers-by at a distance while dust floated like fine snow. A clipboard changed hands. A hard hat tipped. A crane sighed and settled. The inscription area had been masked with a stencil cut the night before. A mason in a faded sweatshirt brushed the surface, then checked the template 3 times. He nodded to the foreman who lifted a hand. The pneumatic chisel sang a high, precise note, and the first letter opened in a bloom of stone. People on the sidewalk stopped to watch as chips skittered onto canvas and the sentence began to reveal itself. The words arrived steady, one groove at a time. By noon, a small crowd had formed at the fence. Parents with strollers, joggers drinking from paper cups, a pair of teenagers on scooters. A bronze plaque lay on a trestle table waiting for its 4 screws, waiting to tell the short version. The date of the hearing, the name of the speaker, the context for the vow. A city worker in a green jacket read it quietly, then read it again. The mason wiped stone dust from his glasses, and stepped back. The letters were sharp enough to throw tiny shadows. A park official looked up from his notes, cleared his throat, and asked the crew for a 5-minute pause. They stepped away, set their tools down, and leaned on the fence with the rest. The official lifted his folder and read the sentence aloud to no one in particular and to everyone at once. Truth does not choose a skin color. It only chooses justice. The words did not echo off the buildings. They settled into the air like a soft weight. A mother whispered, "That's the whole thing." Crews pulled the mask, washed the surface, and brushed the grooves clean until they gleamed in the shade. The foreman ran his finger along the first line and nodded without smiling. A maintenance worker planted 2 small evergreens at the base and pressed the soil with the heel of his hand. A park ranger clipped a temporary ribbon between 2 stakes and stepped back to check the line. The fence remained, but the stone already felt like it belonged. In the afternoon, school children arrived with notebooks and adults who kept them out of the mud. A teacher asked for heads-up and inside voices and then let the chatter go anyway. The kids read the sentence aloud in a chorus that stumbled over justice and laughed at their own timing. One boy raised his hand and said, "It sounds like a thing you can't argue with." And the teacher wrote that down on the back of a flyer. The ranger smiled and looked at her boots. As the light leaned long across the grass, an elder walked up with a cane and a soft hat pulled low. He stood in front of the stone for a slow minute, reading the line twice, maybe 3 times, or reading something under it only he could see. He lifted 2 fingers to his forehead and then to the stone, a salute half remembered from other ceremonies. When he turned, his eyes were wet, but his mouth was steady. He told a teenager in a hoodie, "It matters where you put your words." Local news vans edged in with their dishes tilted, but nothing required them to shout. A reporter spoke in a measured tone about a hearing a vow in a stone that would outlast the week. Her cameraman framed the sentence tight, letting the letters fill the screen like faces. The lower third read "New Memorial Simple Message" and then changed to "Park Honors a Promise." The segment ended with a pullback that showed only trees and the pale block in the clean grass. Neighbors returned at dusk with dogs and long shadows. A choir from a nearby church arrived 2 by 2 and sang a hymn that did not ask permission. They did not sing the line on the stone. They sang around it as if leaving room for it to do its work. A child on a bicycle asked his father what the sentence meant, and the father said, "It means you treat people right, even when no one is looking." The boy rode a small circle and nodded like he understood enough. When the street lights flicked on the engraving, caught the glow and held it. The letters did not shine. They rested, the grooves darkening as the light changed. A plane drew a faint line across the sky and someone pointed and someone else said the flight would be on a screen before midnight. The park did not care. It had its own news. The stone read its sentence to whoever walked close enough to listen. Around the world, the headline kept its grip. Selma of the 21st century. Posters in Cape Town curled at the edges and still held tight. Flyers in Rio smeared in the rain and still read clearly. A Paris billboard faded a fraction under a week of sun and still shouted the same thing in quiet letters. The image of Jasmine, the weight of the envelope, the line on the stone, none of it felt far away anymore. In homes and offices, the clip kept looping while the stone held steady. People watched the silence, replayed the vow, and then looked up the bridge's name. They pointed to the sentence, then to the door, then back to the sentence as if practicing the path from words to action. The international press had chosen its phrase, and communities had found their picture. A park in Washington had given both a place to live. And under that calm sky, the carved words did what carved words do. They waited for each new reader to arrive and decide what to carry away. The verdict of history did not take years to arrive. It came overnight. Barron Trump's name no longer appeared in headlines as an heir or a prodigy, but as a warning. Commentators from Tokyo to Toronto used him as shorthand for the collapse of arrogance. He was the exhibit shown in seminars, the cautionary image projected on lecture hall screens, the smirk under blinding lights, the stumble, the bowed head. The story wrote itself into a three-act arc: pride, exposure, and downfall. And it repeated until the world could recite it without notes. Television packaged his unraveling like a morality play. News programs in Europe rolled slow-motion edits of the hearing, cutting from his insults to the moment Jasmine rose, from his smirk to her vow, from his shrug to his silence. Each broadcast used the same music, a single low drum beat to mark the turn. In Asia, late-night talk shows replayed his desperate defense. Nobody's perfect, and the audience groaned as though watching an athlete drop the ball on the goal line. In Africa, radio hosts called the arc the sound of hubris breaking, and their listeners phoned in with their own examples of arrogance punished by truth. Classrooms turned him into curriculum. In high schools in Canada, teachers asked students to draw 2 columns on paper: performance on one side, principle on the other. They played clips of Barron mocking and Jasmine standing, then asked students to decide where each belonged. In universities in Germany, professors labeled his downfall a hubris curve. And explained how power that ignores principle bends toward collapse. In South Korea, media studies majors slowed the tape to study the silence between his last insult and her reply, discovering that stillness can shout louder than words. The lesson carried across borders because the pattern was universal. Corporate training rooms picked up the clip as if it were a manual. Consultants played it for executives and asked, "At which second would you have chosen humility?" Lawyers used it in seminars showing how evidence and silence can be stronger than 100 talking points. A compliance officer in Zurich paused the video and told his audience, "This is what happens when spin outruns truth." Barron had become not just a political figure, but a case study in the cost of arrogance when facts arrive armed. Artists gave the false shape and texture. In logos, muralists painted Jasmine holding the envelope, while in the background, a faint silhouette of Barron blurred into shadow. In Berlin, a gallery showed a tick Barron's sneer, Jasmine's oath, and finally the carved stone with her words. In Buenos Aires, dancers performed a piece called The Silence, where one figure tried to dominate until another stood without moving, and the music itself shifted. Even in satire, the message remained sharp. Cartoons showed him crushed under the weight of a single sentence. Social media distilled the collapse into seconds. The loop of Barron shrugging followed by Jasmine's glare became a universal gift for arrogance defeated. Threads collected historic examples of pride undone, always ending with Jasmine's vow. On TikTok, students reenacted the moment she unfolded the letter, mouthing the words as their classrooms erupted in applause. Even in cynical corners of the internet where everything is mocked, one line survived unbroken. That vow will outlast him. Communities carried the story into their daily lives. In Brazil, school children wrote the phrase, "Truth does not choose a skin color. It only chooses justice" on chalkboards before math lessons. In South Africa, church choirs sang the line as a refrain between hymns. In France, activists printed it on banners alongside the headline Selma of the 21st century. In the US, a park stele bore the words in stone, and visitors traced the grooves with their fingers as though touching a promise carved into time. Barron's name was there, too, but only as the shadow that made the light visible. Elders told the story in simple sentences. A grandmother in Alabama told her grandson he thought winning was loud, but she showed winning is clear. A retired miner in Wales said he mocked she stood and the world saw the difference. Taxi drivers, teachers, shopkeepers all repeated the same pattern. Arrogance confronted arrogance unmasked. Arrogance destroyed. Barron no longer stood for wealth or inheritance. He stood for the collapse that comes when contempt collides with courage. Even his defenders could not erase the proof. Attempts to discredit the video only reinforced its authenticity. Forensic analysts confirmed metadata. Witnesses testified. Timestamps aligned. The denial cracked like glass under heat. Each time someone shouted witch hunt, the vow echoed louder. Truth does not choose a skin color. It only chooses justice. His arrogance was global, but so was his defeat. So the example hardened into history. Barron Trump became the symbol of how arrogance falls when confronted by courage under lights. Jasmine Crockett became the vessel through which history spoke again. Her vow carried in classrooms, sermons, murals, and songs. The divide in society remained, but above the fracture stretched a message that could not be contained. The past was not dead. It breathed again in her words. And the story ended not in Washington, but everywhere a screen glowed or a wall carried paint. Across continents, people repeated the truth. The arrogant can rise, but they can also fall. And when they fall, the sound is unforgettable. Barron became the warning etched in memory, the proof that pride alone cannot protect against principle. Jasmine's line became the torch pass forward. The light no arrogance could extinguish. The final message left borders without a passport. It was whispered in mosques, spoken in churches, painted on subway walls, written on school notebooks. It belonged to no single nation. It belonged to anyone who believed arrogance could be toppled and justice could speak. And in that message was the conclusion the world carried away. The light of justice can topple even the proudest shadows. And one person who dares to stand can change the history of humanity. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story.